Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Gotham Sharma. Gotham is an executive director of security education and training at Access Cyber, and he has a whole lot of other things going on as well. So welcome, Gotham.
Pete, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on. Could you give our audience a description of your career and how you came to be where you are today from a professional perspective?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in security for about a little over a decade now and had a chance to do a lot of different things from engineering work, pen testing, consulting, education and training, which is where I spend most of my time these days, journalism, media. And it's been a really interesting journey because I've been able to see security from so many different lenses. And the origins for my particular path were in technology, starting in help desk, which a lot of people do, going on to network engineering, and then specializing in security, which is a pretty common route as well these days. But again, as we know, there's so many ways to get into this industry, and happy to chat about those with you.
Awesome. Thanks for the rundown. Yeah, I find that there's a lot of different paths into the industry, but there's not necessarily enough true entry-level jobs. Has that been your experience as well?
I think so, for sure, right? We see different companies cite different statistics all the time about how many openings there are. I don't think anyone has a clear number of how many of those are, number one, entry level, how accurate those numbers are, and how we would even start to gauge that, right? I think is such a challenge. Entry level is a challenge for sure. One of the things that when students that I work with, I talk to them about is think about security adjacent roles. If you're in a network engineering team, are you doing security work? Is that a security role? Probably, right? Because you're probably interfacing with security concepts and components as part of that job, right? So cloud computing, huge. There's always going to be overlap between cloud and security, network and security. And then that's just some of the technical roles. If we think about roles that are less, quote unquote, technical, sort of the governance, risk, compliance type things, right? People in those roles maybe often don't think of themselves as being in security. I want to kind of work on the mind shift also. So there's an actual problem, but also a thinking about, is my role a security role? Am I contributing to the security of the organization I work for and our clients, right? So that's kind of where the mindset reframe, I think, is also important there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think our biggest problem in the industry is just creating a pipeline of junior people. And a lot of people talk about the issues that we have. People are trying to help people break in, but there's not really a lot of talk on the hiring side about how we can actually justify building that entry-level pipeline. I saw a guy had posted up something, I believe it was ThreatX was hiring their CEO, and he mentioned that they had posted two jobs. One was an entry-level security analyst, level 1. The other one was a level 3. They got 5,200 applicants for the entry-level role and 100 or so for the tier 3 role. So if that's not a show of how many people are trying to break into the industry, I don't know what is. That's a staggering number. I've always said that I think the number of people trying to break in right now is somewhere in the tens of thousands. But based on that anecdote alone, I would say it's probably even higher than that. It may be 100,000 or more. So with the industries and the companies that you've worked with in the past, have you ever seen a company successfully create one of those entry-level, training programs or a way to onboard sort of a pipeline of these people?
Yeah, so that number, first of all, I want to touch on that for a second. That's probably very common. And there's a couple things that go into that. One, we've almost convinced people that it's easy to break into security compared to other industries or careers, which isn't necessarily true, but isn't. There's still, it has its nuances. Yes, we need folks, allegedly, but we also have, there's still a process of getting into the space, right? And that path looks different from everybody. I think about more entry level, more people applying for these entry level roles than the senior role you mentioned. Part of that, I think, is because we encourage people to apply even if you don't have the experience, which I have so many different thoughts on that, right? Apply even if you don't have the experience, sure, because no one's going to have every bullet on a job description. Very few people. The senior roles I think about, people are probably more content where they are at a senior level. I imagine that also, right? They've been doing the work for a little bit. They know what the work is. And not everyone's looking to jump ship and looking for change, right? Some people are comfortable where they are. I want to go back to the other thing you were saying, though, about cultivating pipelines. So I've worked in a number of organizations where companies, I think, have done a great job. So JP Morgan, kind of the start of my career, right? They had a rotational analyst program. So what that was and a lot of bigger banks and companies have this program. Problem becomes that the smaller, mid-sized, smaller companies, can they afford to dedicate time and resources to building that pipeline? And how much of that do we outsource to schools and boot camps and all that stuff? And what are the gaps there? So JP Morgan had this rotational analyst program. It's a year-long program. You did 3 months with various different engineering teams, right? That was really my first exposure to security and saying, oh, security as a job function, as a job title, this is interesting. And that's where my personal interest started. But that rotational program was, you were a paid employee. It was maybe an analyst. The title was analyst. And every 3 months, you would work with a different team. So you would get a sense of what the team was doing, what their role was. It was more broadly in engineering, but there were also security specializations that you could go through. So I think a program like that is great. And then at the end of that, what happened was, if you were a good fit and the team thought you were a good fit for them, they would go ahead and hire you as a full-time employee. So programs like that are great. I worked with, and there's a lot of different ways of addressing this. So when I worked for the city of New York, for example, we had come up with a program called the Tech and Residence Cyber Core. And the idea there was, we would take, because there was, again, this gap is the theme of the show, and we see this in so many places when we start looking. The gap between what's being taught in higher education in colleges and universities and what's being asked for on the job, right? Colleges attaching certs to their coursework is a very new phenomenon. I hadn't seen that before, right? Western Governors, shout out to them. They've been doing it for a long time, WGU. But this idea that, hey, we're going to have a Security Plus as part of your Security 101 course, that's a very new phenomenon. So the Cyber Core would take people who were working in industry and say, hey, would you like to be an adjunct professor at a college in New York City? And so a lot of people would love that. They had it was on a lot of people's timelines. And I think a lot of people in tech have that. I'm going to teach at some point, maybe when I retire or close to retiring. But what's happening is, we're giving people that opportunity to come and work and come and teach at City University in New York, for example, and build curriculum, inform curriculum, and deliver those courses. So that's two examples I have of thinking about pipelines and what they look like, about getting people from industry and getting that knowledge into the hands of students and people who are starting their careers.
Yeah, I think we definitely need more of those programs. The question about volume, though, what kind of volume of students or apprentices were coming through those programs? Because I hear a lot of, some companies will do something like this, but it's on such a small scale. It's just a drop in the bucket when you look at the overall needs, which I think the talent gap is like the senior level individual contributor, senior engineer, senior consultant. We need more of those people. We need so much more of those people than we have people coming through the entry level roles. There's this bottleneck, basically, the way I see it, at the entry level, where we just can't get people filtered in. So what kind of volume were you seeing with those programs?
So the programs are still pretty selective, and that's the challenge there, right? We're not just taking everybody. There were still kind of universities they had partnerships with, universities that there were kind of agreements between, and things like that. So volume isn't huge. We have to figure out a better way to kind of make that accessible, right, more widely, and figure out what that looks like. I agree with that totally.
So was it like on the order of magnitude of dozens or hundreds?
I would say so. If you look at the Tech and Residence Core, we were doing at that point hundreds of students a year. It was in the hundreds for sure, right? So, but that was with so let's say you brought on 20 industry professionals to come teach at the university. Now these people would be in the classroom, and they'd be teaching per semester. Several hundred students would graduate through those courses or finish those courses, right? And the benefit of that was that they would have links to industry through their professor. Whereas traditionally in a classroom, your professor probably doesn't have any industry contacts.
Yeah, a lot of people will go to teach after they've retired, or they're looking specifically to get out of industry because they're stressed out and burnout, so they want to teach. So yeah.
Right. Or as a full-fledged career on its own, which academia is for many people, right? You can go and say, I'm going to get my degree, my master's, my PhD, and then I'm going to go teach, and that's your career academic. And nothing wrong with that, but there is a little disconnect, I think, from industry and your value that you can add to students in terms of career.
Yeah, so I know you've had some pretty strong opinions I've seen on LinkedIn as far as certs versus experience versus education. Where do you come down on that debate? What do you think is the most important?
I think we need all of it, right? So first of all, I'll say Pete, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'll say Pete Strauss commented on something, or Pete Strauss liked something. I'm like, I'm going to like this thing. I 100%, I know I'm going to like this because for the most part, I'm not trying to lump you into my way of thinking, but I think we have very similar kind of thinking. You're on LinkedIn saying things that most people would be afraid to say sometimes. So I want to shout you out for that.
Appreciate it.
And I'll see the kind of people say, this is crazy, this is silly, and it's you're doing it in a very respectful and very mindful and way, and you're bringing a different angle to every conversation you're a part of. So I love seeing that. Keep that going. For my perspective on the certs and degrees and stuff, I think certs are important. I think the experience is important, however you can get it, whether that looks like you spend some time, do some CTFs, or, it's all about, it comes down to how can you articulate what you've been doing. If you built a home lab, a lot of people build home labs. Can you now document the process? Can you explain the journey? Can you talk about that? The university piece, do we have like 3 hours to chat? The university piece, I think universities are doing the best they can in some way. But the value proposition is unclear about what happens after I sit in college in 4 years and increasingly now 5 years, which is how long it takes for people to graduate. And you can't not look at that as a business incentive to graduate people later and later, right? 2 more semesters of tuition, I'll take it, right? As a college, you'd be silly to turn that down. So again, it comes back to the disconnect between academia and industry. If you're, and I'm always talking about Western Governors University, I have no affiliation with them, but I think they do good work because they're so on top of what industry is looking for, right? And they've, for the most part, cut out any unnecessary prerequisites and things like that. So when we talk about the traditional college model, it's I'm going to go here for 4 years, and then I will qualify, maybe, hopefully, I hope, possibly for an entry-level job if they exist and I can find them. Which comes back to our conversation of, do the entry-level jobs in cyber still exist? Are they hiring at the volume we need? So I want to stay on this for one more second. It's disconnect between industry for academia. It's not really the goal. If you ask colleges, the goal is not to get people hired. And I've had administrators at schools tell me this. I've had professors tell me this. The goal is not to get students employed. The goal is to make you well-rounded. And I'm still, for the life of me, cannot figure out what that definition entails. What does it mean to be a well-rounded person? And why does it cost me $200K?
Yeah, and who defines what well-rounded is? And that's
right.
That's a great point.
Right.
Think about what the actual goal of the entity is. You could say the same for certification companies or the boot camps. Ask them, what their mission is. So yeah, I mean, you make a good point. We need closer industry ties between the hiring managers actually looking for certain skill sets, and usually very hands-on skill sets, sometimes intangibles, which may not be teachable in a classroom, or maybe they can be. But level setting expectations between the people doing the hiring and the people cranking out new students. One issue I see a lot is folks will go and they'll not only stop at their bachelor's, they'll go and get their master's of science in cybersecurity or information assurance, and then they'll get their security plus, maybe even get another certification or two, and but they still have no experience. And then they come to the market and they try and get any security job, really. But at that point, they have their master's degree. They're unbalanced. They have too much education and not enough experience, and oftentimes their salary expectations will be much higher because they have their master's, or I've even seen some people with their PhDs. How do we, what do we do with those folks, basically, that have all that education, those higher salary expectations? What do we do with them, and whose responsibility is it to level set expectations with these folks?
Yeah, that's really good. So if you're someone who wants to get your degree and you went and got your master's, the person you're describing, you're not wrong, because we promised you a certain thing. You go get your master's, this is the life that's going to unlock for you, and that it just isn't true anymore. That promise isn't accurate anymore, right? There was a time where it was true. There was a time where having your degree meant you were, where having a degree was sort of a rare thing, and because it was rare, it conferred to you special advantages. Now, because we've made it so accessible, and again, there are barriers still to achieving education and kind of pursuing your education. There's still barriers there, don't get me wrong, but we've made it a lot easier to go and get your degree. And then it comes down to supply and demand, right? Now you've got your bachelor's, you've got your master's. Okay, so do these other 600 people. What are you doing that is above and beyond? What are you doing that's a little bit different? What are you doing that helps you stand out? Right. So as far as our responsibility as people, I think level set is the right word, right? You use, right? They have to kind of be mindful that they are very educated, traditionally, textbook, theoretically. And depending on where you went to school, you may have had some hands-on experience as well, right? But if you just said, I'm going to sit heads down 6, 7 years, get my PhD, get my undergrad degree, my master's, and not think about industry at all, that's kind of on you a little bit, right? To not have any awareness of what's happening in industry, to not pursue your search, to not build something, to not, everyone's going to approach it in their own way. You don't have to go speak at conferences. Does it up your profile? Does doing something like this, is this helpful? Are we doing this for a reason? Yes, right? These things are, it's the hope is that we get the information out there. We help folks with the knowledge, with the information. But these are, if you're out there doing something, what are you doing besides that? That's all that to say, what are you doing besides just sitting in the classroom and doing the work that's being assigned to you? Right? I mean, I'd like to see some initiative. I'd like to see some, you're pursuing something beyond that.
Yeah, yeah. I generally advise people if they're looking at, because I do free career guidance calls for as many people as I can, and I advise people. They'll say they'll get their bachelor's degree, they'll have a security plus, and they'll ask me, should I go get my my master's degree, or what cert should I get next? So each career call is a little bit different, but generally I'm advising people go after experience, no matter however you can.
Right.
To get a help desk role or an internship. These things are all very hotly contested. The help desk probably less so than any of the true entry level security jobs. But just find some way to get some sort of experience. It could be volunteering. It could be volunteering for B-sides, or going to your local ISACA meetup or ISSA or IC squared. Just get in the industry somehow. Yeah. Get involved with people that are doing the work now, and build your profile, build your network as you're going through education, so you don't come out on the other side of that just completely blindsided. That
100%. Yeah. I mean, if I think about it, like every role, and this is anecdotal, but I think it speaks to other people too. Every role I've had has been, if I trace it far back enough, the result of networking, the result of me making a meaningful connection with somebody. Either I offered something or they offered something, and there was some exchange there. And we were able to say, okay, where I was able to demonstrate what I could do, because otherwise I'm just a name on a piece of paper, and you're looking at 600, 700 of those documents, and nothing really stands out. But if you have a personal connection with somebody, if you have some sort of meaningful professional contact, that's valuable, right? And I think the hesitation for a lot of people is, what do I have to offer? I'm just starting out. I don't really have anything to offer. And the good friend of mine, I use this example a lot, trying to break into security. Worked as a barista. Someone came in. Actually, they started talking. He was like the head of security engineering at a company nearby. They started talking about fitness. My buddy's super fit. He's a personal trainer, does some of that work. And so now he's like, I'm happy to kind of help you out with your fitness, right? And it's just thinking about, and this person had no idea about fitness, right? And it's just the way we're trading knowledge. We may know something in a certain area that someone else needs. And that's how life goes, right? We're exchanging information constantly. And so they built this relationship based on fitness, and just him stopping by for his coffee, them sharing knowledge about fitness, and kind of developing this relationship. And he's like, hey, why don't you come down and come take a look at some of the roles we have open, right? So now he's kind of coaching him. He's become his career coach. He's become his fitness coach. And I think those kind of relationships are so amazing to see.
That's a great story. Yeah. The takeaways for me from that are, if you're looking to break into the industry, or if you're on the hiring side, even, everybody says network. Not many people talk about what it actually looks like to do that. Like, what are the tactical steps that you actually need to do? But that's a great example. Think about the expertise that you have that you can lend to somebody else, even if it's not in that field that you're trying to break into.
Exactly.
And being open-minded and thinking about ways that you can increase your chances of getting in front of somebody who's in the industry already, and really keeping an eye open for opportunity when it knocks. A a lot of people, I think, if they don't get a job in security right away, they tend to get very down on themselves, very negative.
Mhm.
I've seen that just shoot people in the foot so often. They'll complain about it on LinkedIn explicitly and often, and
Yeah.
when they do that, they're completely closing so many doors, and they just have uh, no sense that that's actually happening because
Mhm.
nobody comes out and says, "Hey, look, man, you're really kind of hurting yourself here." So, yeah, keeping an open mind, think about who you need to network with, get in front of the right people, and eventually, what you're looking to do will happen. It's just you have to be persistent enough, and you just have to know that on a long enough timeline, with enough effort, eventually you're gonna get what you're looking for. So
100%. On the networking piece too, Pete, I think a lot of times people think networking means ask, ask, ask for things I want, right? How can I express and get in front of you and say, oh, this is what I'm looking for. Oh, I'm hiring. So many people start the first conversation with, hey, do you have any? Are there any internships at your job? I've seen this. I'm at conferences all the time, and students go up there well intentioned. They don't have any malicious intention. They're just up there and it's like, oh, you hang out there for saying, what's your company about? You try to feign interest and like, oh, are you hiring any internships? Are you hiring? And these vendors are not really interested in talking about that. They're looking to make their sales and kind of make, schedule demos. So they're not really interested in that. They'll say, go to the website, check it out. But that's an opportunity to connect in a meaningful level, right? In a meaningful way. The second thing I'll say about networking is if you can figure out where are the people that could be helpful to you and you could be helpful to where you are currently. I had a student last year who she worked at a hospital and in a non-tech, non-security role, and she did a boot camp. And through there, she realized at the hospital, they've got to have a security team. That's the other thing. Every organization is going to have someone doing some sort of security. And if they're not, that's a different concern. But there's probably someone handling those type of tasks. And if you can figure out who they are and how to get in contact with them, which is exactly what she did. She started writing on LinkedIn every day. Everything she did in class, she would post about, she would write about, and tag the hospital, tag whatever. And so her manager saw it, and her manager was like, you really seem to be interested in the security stuff. I'm happy to make some connections to you, make some connections for people on the security team. And let's see what we can do. Fast forward now, it's 8 months later. She's working as a security analyst at that same hospital, right? Probably for double the pay. The work is a lot more interesting to her personally and rewarding, and she's having the time of her life. So it's about, if you're thinking about where do I start my network, you're probably involved somewhere where you can talk to somebody. This is the idea of that 6 degrees of separation and all that, where someone somewhere can probably help out, right? And think about what that looks like. The organizations you mentioned, if you're women at cyber, ISACA, all these different things, if you can be part of them, if you can volunteer, get involved, I think that's a great way to network, right? Giving of our time early on, the most thing you have to give is your time, right? Time is, you have it. It's obviously a luxury for everybody, but being able to give your time, you may not feel like you know a lot. That's okay. Can you help set up at the conference? Yeah, sure. Right. That's something I'm giving up. I'm giving my time. I'm giving my just kind of my support wherever I can. And I think that goes a long way if people have that mindset.
absolutely. So we talked a little bit about how on the candidate side, if you're trying to break into the industry, what you would do to network. What about the
Mhm.
hiring side? Because there will be a lot of hiring managers and those listening to these podcasts. Is there any best practices you can think of specifically for the hiring side to identify, especially senior level people, since that seems to be where the majority of the need is for most organizations? How should a hiring manager go about finding those passionate people that really don't need to look for a job?
Yeah, I think writing genuine job descriptions, first of all, is where it starts, right? There's small things you could do. I saw a job description that said, you don't have to send us a resume, just link us to your LinkedIn, right? And it was such a small thing, but it's like, oh, okay, I don't have to copy everything from my LinkedIn, and because I'm someone who doesn't update my resume often. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, but I'm not updating my resume often necessarily. So something like that. That's just, how can we remove the friction of the hiring process and the application process? That's a big thing, first of all. Just send us your LinkedIn is a big one. Maybe not having like 50 job bullets in the job requirements and things like that, and all these things that, frankly, you may not even need, but you're just putting it out there either to vet or screen out certain candidates, or whatever the intention there is. So writing mindful job descriptions, figuring out, what's lacking in people's jobs that they're currently in. And people are very vocal about it on LinkedIn, especially as you mentioned, right? People are happy to tell about, oh, this happened in my job. They'll they'll couch it in safer terms because they don't want to get fired, but they'll say it and they'll express what their frustrations are. So looking at who's your target audience that you're trying to recruit and what are their pain points. It's like sales anywhere, figuring out what their pain points are. What are they missing in their job? If someone says, hey, I can't believe we have to go back to the office, maybe flexibility of work location, right? Remote possibility, hybrid, figuring what that looks like. I think a lot of people, especially at senior levels, expect remote at this point, right? They're expecting remote is just, if it's not remote, they won't even entertain the conversation. The other thing that's important to a lot of people in security, especially, I think, are folks who are in it for the right reasons, are constantly looking to improve their skills and upskill. And they realize that it's not just kind of for interest, it's kind of a job security, right? If I'm not upskilling, if I'm not learning, I'm going to get left behind in the industry. And that's still true, especially in security. So do we have some sort of budget for helping people upskill, right? These are perks that other industries offer, but are particularly important in security. Flexibility of work, upskilling budget, education budget. And then, some people want to be in senior roles without having direct reports and management, right? A lot of people in security who want to be in higher titles and access that higher salaries, but they're not really managers of people. And that's not interesting to them at all. So how can we design personality fits, right, for people who are hiring and who are looking to hire? It's a couple of different things. Those are some initial thoughts, I think.
Yeah, and I would add interesting work too. If somebody is increasing their title, their responsibilities throughout their career, the quickest way to turn them off is to say you're going to do a bunch of this grunt work.
Yes,
and that brings up another opportunity for hiring at the entry level. If you have a pretty senior team and they're all doing some pretty entry level or grunt work, compile a list of the types of responsibilities that they have that they don't enjoy doing, and as long as it's not too technical or too difficult, a new job at the junior level to support all of those senior level people versus hiring just another senior level person that you have to pay top dollar for and may leave in 6 months for more salary. That's something that I hear pretty often is the constant revolving door of people leaving for more salary, and just I think that's a natural outgrowth of the industry being relatively immature and there being a shortage of people in those senior roles. Has that been something that you've noticed for security professionals, especially at the senior level, the moving for salary every 6 months or a year?
Yeah, I mean, I think by nature, a lot of people in security are kind of curious, right? So they have a capacity for boredom. They have a capacity to get, they want to see new things. They want to experience new things, and that's part of the security mindset, right? It's sort of the hacker mindset, sort of the mentality of folks working in this industry. So, job hopping for higher salaries, I think, is a best practice. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but we see it pretty often. And the interesting work piece as well, right? We're doing it because, hey, I've kind of figured out what we do here. It's the same thing. And there's going to be, there's nothing's ever just the same in security because there's always going to be changes. But I understand the work here. Where we go now? What's next? What else can I learn? What else can I pick up? And that goes with the desire to upskill constantly and learn.
Any tips for the hiring managers out there who have some really, top performers that tend to job hop because they get bored easily, or, they know that they're in demand and they know that if they go, switch jobs every few months, they can get more salary. The way I see it, you basically have two options. You can either legislate for that turnover, plan on it and plan around it and have a good sort of succession plan, or you can try really, really hard on the retention piece. Would you lean into either one of those strategies? And I guess, do you have any tips on either of those?
So I'll say this. I'll share a funny thing I thought about a while ago. There was a time in my career where I would have taken a pay cut to be able to wear jeans to work, right? And that was something that was me. I'm like, I don't want to dress up. I just want to wear jeans to work and show up and do the work. And I put a number on that. I'm like, this is how much of a pay cut I would take if they let me wear jeans to work every single day. So the point of that being, what's the specific perk that we're going to use to keep somebody? They're not. You can't have blanket perks, right? Blanket perks are useful for people, but I'd like to have, if you value someone as a top talent, you want to check in with them and say, what is important to you? And you want to have those periodic check-ins and say, what how are you doing? How are things going here? And if they have somewhere, if they have a 2x salary increase somewhere else, and you can't match that, you're going to wish them the best. And you're going to say, have a great, we wish you the best in your career. But if there are things that people will give up salaries for, there are things people will give up comfort for, or there are things that matter holistically as a human being that we're going to give up certain things for. It's not, I don't think if you ask most people, salary is why we work, but there's other things why we stay at a job or at a certain company. There's other reasons that keep us there. So I think that's the biggest piece, figuring out what is important to people. And that requires obviously a lot of one-on-one conversations and figuring that out. But again, if you're claiming they're top talent, you're going to make time for that.
Yeah, and I think being realistic too is somebody in a hiring position that everybody is different, and you need to understand that you need to stay close enough to people to understand what their individual motivator is. As an external recruiter, I spent all my time looking for people's pain points and their motivators for making a move, and I've gotten very good at getting that from people very quickly. There's some really common ones, and then there's some that are just unique to the individual.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you mentioned, flexibility is a big one I hear. Working remote is a big one I hear. Usually people, if they're making a move for salary, it's either because they've become accustomed to doing that, or they're just not making enough relative to the market, or they're not making enough to pay their bills. Some people are just vastly underpaid. Some people know it, and some people actually don't, in which case I'll educate those folks. But yeah, most of the time when I talk to somebody and they're looking to make a move, I would say it's probably not actually the salary. It's more, my boss doesn't listen to me, or I want to work remote. I'm sick of traveling. Those convenience things that really make you either loathe your job or feel like, okay, this is actually a pretty decent setup. It's not always about the money.
100%. I think it's so accurate, right? All the other things that what we call now culture, right? Workplace culture is kind of that. A lot of the things we're talking about get lumped under there as well. I think if you foster community in your workplace, that's such a big thing, right? Because people will say for community, and that's valuable. I'm not saying that someone should stay at a place that's undervaluing them or underpaying them. That's never advised. But know what your worth is, know what your rate is, know what the market rate for your work is, and then a lot of people are like, I've heard people say, the job's okay, but I've got some great colleagues at work. And, we have these events that happen at work, and I really like that. I really like being part of that community. That word comes up a lot sometimes. I'm careful with that because some places will say we're like a family, and that's a universally red flag is what we're taught, right? If the place says you're like a family, be mindful of that. Have you seen that, Pete? I'm just gonna say it to you. What are your thoughts on that, real quick?
It could go either way. I've seen workplaces where it's definitely a red flag, and then I've seen workplaces where actually they're legitimately like that. There's one public accounting firm I've worked with specifically. They're an IT audit and security and compliance shop, and I describe them to candidates, this client of mine, as a family, because they are family friendly. People do take time off to take their kids to the doctor's office and stuff like that without having to put in a request and all that stuff. They do regular outings together. Everybody there is very happy. They've had multiple boomerang employees that have left and come back. They've had people with 10 plus year tenures, and it's just a really great work environment. And as cliche as it sounds, that does seem to me kind of like a family environment. That said, you'll also see the very toxic workplaces that'll advertise themselves as a work family, and that can be a red flag. I think going to Glassdoor and reading between the lines can really tell you a lot about an organization, or asking an employee that actually works there now or used to work there. That's often pretty illuminating as well. So that's just kind of a best practice I've discovered over the years. If you're interviewing somewhere, try and get a feel for the culture of the organization over video calls or whatever it may be. Sometimes that's kind of tough to tell. There was a story I heard. It was about in-person interviewing where somebody said, "Oh yeah, I went to interview at their office," and there was just kind of an odd hush over the office. So that gave them some chills almost in a bad way. They were like, this seems like something's off. It's kind of a
Yeah.
red flag. And turns out, that place wasn't apparently great to work. So trying to look for those kind of things as best you can in a video interview is good, but a lot of times you can't really get a true sense of what they're like to work with. So ask a former employee, ask a current employee, check
Mhm.
Glassdoor. Uh, I hear a lot about how company culture is such a big effect on somebody's tenure, if they stick around or not. And toxicity, once it starts to creep into an organization or a team, I've noticed it tends to kind of spread. And it's
Mhm.
like a snowball just rolling downhill, and it just keeps picking up steam. And eventually everybody leaves, and
Yeah.
then the company has to, backfill the whole team. I've seen that in the recruiting world. I've seen that in the security world. Um, so any tips for, retention when it comes to your team for hiring managers out there, if they're starting to sense some toxicity in their workplace, or to make sure that they do sense it in the beginning if it starts to kind of bubble up?
Yeah, I think it manifests in a lot of different ways, right? What we're calling toxicity is, and I think one of the big things is, does everyone have a voice here, or is everyone being heard? That's kind of the basic metric. Is someone feeling like they're not being heard? Are you hearing people say that? And it really starts with, like, is it a place where someone feels comfortable voicing their concerns? That's, I think, the biggest indicator. Are people coming up to you and saying, "Hey, um, I think this could be improved, right? Maybe we could tighten this up a little bit." Feedback organizations, I think that's a big. If people are not comfortable offering that feedback, that's probably something we should be mindful of, right? Um, and that has to start at the top, right? Where can we? Are there any limitations on? Is there someone who we can't criticize, right? You hear about those rock star job. We'll look for a rock star, and usually what that means is, we'll come as you are. We'll pay you whatever because you have these skills, and if you want to work some days, you can work. If you don't want to work some days, you don't have to. And companies bending over backwards for these people, and that sort of, and we can't criticize them, or they can get away with anything. That kind of, when you see those characters emerge, that's a problem. I think that's another big red flag. You're gonna say something. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, no, resentment, I think, is what ends up being bred there. And
Mhm.
resentment is one of the most powerful emotions there is. I listen to a lot of psychologists, and they say that if resentment starts to creep into a marriage, it's some astronomical number more likely that that couple's going to split up if there's any actual resentment that's bubbling under the surface because one person feels like they can't talk about what they're feeling. Yeah, and you make an interesting point about the top performers that might be jerks. Some companies do have a no jerks policy, and I think it can function well. I think you need to be careful about how you define a jerk. Is it? I might be viewed as a jerk to some people because I'm outspoken and say it like it is. So I think you have to be careful about that. But I think every team has the latitude, or should have the latitude, to build the culture they want, as long as they're not discriminating against folks, or and being cognizant of their biases.
I think as long as no one is being negatively impacted by that, also, and that, not that we don't think anyone's being impacted, but we're not. No one feels it personally. They're being harmed by that environment. That's a big thing, also.
Yep. So, you've been involved in a bunch of different organizations over the years, and done a lot of different things. Have you noticed any best practices for interviewing over the years? So, speaking of top performers, I know a lot of top performers, for instance, they won't want to wait around for an extremely long interview process,
Mhm.
or too many rounds, or too many hoops to jump through, too many exercises. Are there any other things that you can think of that would be good best practices for interviewing?
I think if we think about what the interview is meant for, it's to get to know the other person, right? And a lot of times we ask questions that prevent us from doing that. We're asking questions that, or you go and you look up answers, you're googling answers. What's the best answer to my strength weakness question? None of that feels sincere, right? All that feels like you're reading off the script, I'm reading off the script, and no one's getting to know each other. So how do we circumvent that? Is we let the applicant really just talk about themselves in a way that they seem appropriate and feel in a way that they're comfortable doing. Um, Keeping questions as open ended as possible, right? Keeping questions as open and just kind of having conversation like we're having here today, right? This doesn't feel like I'm interviewing you or you're interviewing me. It's pretty flowing pretty naturally. We have a little bit of rapport and things like that. But um, yeah, so I think a lot of times interviews feel very scripted. They're, the hiring manager looking up questions to ask. The applicants are looking up good answers, and it feels very doesn't feel like it has a human element to it. It feels very disconnected that way. So I think the workaround for that is, can we just let it flow conversationally, especially if you're hiring senior folks, right? They didn't get here. You're not here to kind of vet their technical chops. You're here to kind of see if they're a good fit for your organization at this point, and that can mean a lot of different things. And if you let people talk, you'll find things that are either a good fit or things that are maybe not a good fit for you, and mutually you'll be able to ascertain that. So I think just kind of let it be conversational, let it flow pretty smoothly, and again, like you said, don't make them jump through too many hoops, because there's someone else who won't.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good point. That if you have that practical exercise in 5 different interview rounds, and you got to get sign off from all the executives, and it takes a month and a half, somebody else is moving through the interview process with 2 rounds in 2 weeks, and you just
100%.
lost to them
Yeah.
almost 100% of the time. But yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up about kind of making interviews conversations. Now that I think about it, most of the hiring managers that I've worked with that had the best retention rates were ones where the interviews felt more like a conversation than an interrogation.
Right.
They would naturally ask questions, and the conversation would flow. They weren't trying to get people. They were finding ways to bring out kind of the best in people versus asking them questions that, if answered wrong, they would immediately disqualify that person. So it's just kind of a different way of thinking about hiring too, is finding ways to hire somebody versus finding reasons not to hire somebody. So that's just kind of a best practice, especially when there's a limited talent pool. And if even if you have a
Yeah.
really experienced recruiter and it's a very niche role that you're looking to fill, and they present you 2 good candidates, if you disqualify those 2 right away for whatever reason, you may not get a third. So it's
Mm-hmm.
to just find reasons to hire somebody versus.
Exactly. And I mean, again, even in a competitive market, organizations still have to be kind of mindful, and they do have to do their vetting and screening. So I do understand that. But again, keep it to a minimum, I think.
For sure. Is there a magic number of interview rounds or formats in your mind? Video or in person?
I think the less the better, right? If we can knock everything out on one video call and everyone can make it to that, that's ideal. But I know scheduling is a problem sometimes. Maybe someone needs to be on that call who can't. So I think anything beyond 2 starts to feel excessive. Anything beyond 2, I want to send you an invoice for my time, right? That's what it feels like.
Yep. Yep. Uh, for me, I guess the sweet spot is kind of 2 to 3 rounds, because I've seen it work against a company when they're only doing 1 round. And yes, they can make a very quick decision, and that is viewed well. But then there's also the sense that the company didn't do their due diligence, and that might be a red flag. On the other hand, if you go too long, we already kind of talked about the problems with that. And I think too, the actual length of the hiring process, not just the
Mhm.
rounds, the number of rounds. I think that matters. If you do 2, 3 rounds, but get it done in 2 weeks, great.
Right.
But if you do
Right.
2 rounds and it takes you 2 months,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
that's that's a different story
I
entirely.
mean, you shouldn't forget that you're interviewing, right? Like, it shouldn't have been so much time shouldn't have passed from your last interview. They're like, oh, we're still doing this? I forgot. We're we're still on this. Yeah. So to your point, due diligence, company's liability, and kind of company covering themselves. But I think that's also, there are ways to do that you can be efficient about, and still be efficient, right? You can be effective at that and still do it efficiently, if you've got your hiring process down to a science.
Have you been pretty close to working with HR or recruiters in your previous roles?
I have in some roles, yeah.
How have you found that relationship? Like, were there any tensions that you felt in working with those folks, or any good success stories you could talk about?
Um, so I think about, like, where it's not, it doesn't have to be a stressful relationship, right? Because it's tempting to offload some of the work to them, right? In the hiring work, and in sort of the hiring process. But we have to remember they're not security professionals, right? So they'll be very good at vetting people and finding candidates. But we're looking for a certain type of person. We're looking for a certain type of professional and things like that. So I think, as much as the desire was to be hands off on that, there needs to be a little bit more hands-on, or kind of, if you can point out to HR folks, what's the sort of the, here's this sort of avatar of this of an ideal person we'd like to hire, right? What does that look like? What does their background look like? What does education look like? Um, and even give them maybe a little bit of a crash course in security. That goes a long way, right? And that's a tough job for HR, because they have to be a little bit well versed in so many different industries based on whatever the organization does and they're hiring. So if we can give them a little bit of a crash course, so that when they go out and search for candidates, they're aware of what is and isn't a good fit, right? They can kind of do that on their own. So that by the time candidates get to the hiring managers themselves, we've already vetted out people who might not be a good fit.
Yeah, and I think a great way to do that, just as an example, would be think about the people that you've hired in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Have you hired somebody with a similar skill set in the past? If so, just hand their resume or their LinkedIn profile to the HR people.
Yes.
Don't just stop there, but say, all right, highlight on their, print it out and highlight on there, do it virtually on a Word document or something. Highlight on there what you think is important and maybe put a little comment or notation as to why. And then just as a follow-up to that, if there are any keywords or tooling or anything like that that might be associated with one other keyword, put those synonyms or related terms in there.
Yes.
I think especially inexperienced recruiters, a lot of times they'll just search for job titles, which, as we know, can be extremely misleading in security. There's no standardization there at all. But, if you include a bunch of those terms, say, hey, don't focus so much on the job titles, look for people that have done these things and that look kind of similar to this guy, or gal. That's just kind of a best practice. And talk to about the intangibles. A lot of times people make it to the hiring manager. They've, met whatever technical screen the recruiter can perform, but then they get to the hiring manager and they can't speak on the phone very well, or they say unprofessional things and things like that. So tips on how to look for those red flags too. So speaking of which, I'm sure you have some good stories as far as red flags on the candidate side. Are there any that you can think of that are definitely a no-go?
Candidate red flags. I came across a resume where someone they had their name and then underneath they put script kiddie. Right. And this is for a fairly entry level role, but I was like, yeah, this tells me you don't know what that term means, and that it's not it's not something I put on my resume. It's not something I'd brag about, because if you look at what that term means, it's not something to be proud of. So, and again, that was something that would be coached and things like that. So again, it depends how much time we have, how much we're willing to invest, right? That was something I got on a call. I was like, listen, even if we don't hire you, this is something that's going to be a red flag for a lot of organizations. And that was something the candidate was able to get rid of from their resume. We didn't end up hiring him, but it was something that would have lost some opportunities down the road also, because anyone looking at that from a technical mindset is going to say, all right, I'm not sure what this resume is about.
Yeah, it could be a very weird strategy leaning into that term, even if they did know what it meant.
100%. Yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome that you guys took the time to actually let that person know, hey, this could be pretty negatively. I think the industry would be a lot better off in general if more people did that. I know everybody's kind of overworked and stressed and stuff like that. So it's hard to take time out of your day to mentor. But even just informal mentoring these days is so important. When you look at the number of people looking to break in, and I know it's crazy the amount of time that it takes to mentor somebody appropriately, properly, to do it right, to where you're actually positively affecting their outcomes. It does take a lot of time. And so I think that's where I see the real challenge in the industry being, is it's such a heavy lift in terms of investment to get these entry level folks ready for a security role, even if it comes down to, the intangibles and professionalism and communication skills. And there's just so much stuff that if you've never been in a professional role before, that's why I think a lot of people say, if you can get some sort of other professional experience before you break into security, you're going to be so much better off, just because you understand how email systems work and expectations around communication and hierarchies and all sorts of these intangible things. Do you see that security can actually be an entry level role, or no?
This is the $1 million question, right? Are there entry level roles in security? Is it an entry level field? I think the way we look at security now, no, because if you are saying an entry level security role to me means being a security analyst, um, that's too narrow of a focus, right? If you say I'm going to open it up to, and I'll preface it with this: cybersecurity is not just about tech. We know this, right? There's so many roles out there that are not technical, right? In the way we traditionally think of technology. But if you are willing to open up your definition of what an entry level role in security looks like, I think there are security roles, entry level security roles, right? But if you're focused on it has to be security analyst, it has to have cybersecurity in the title or the job description, then you're not going to be, you're going to struggle to find those for sure. This comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Is a network role a security role? Is a cloud role a security role? Can you make that argument? Most times, if I look at your job description, there's probably going to be some overlap with security in those roles, for example. So help desk even. Are you resetting passwords? Are you helping people get back into their accounts? These are security functions, right? So how do we articulate what we're doing? How are we able to demonstrate that, articulate it, and make a case that we would be a good fit for a dedicated security role? So long answer, but short answer to that is it depends on how you're looking at things, right?
Yep. Perspective is everything, and attitude. That's sort of an intangible I hear from a lot of hiring managers that they're looking for is, the cliche is passion. Everybody's looking for passion, but attitude means a lot as well. If you encounter a problem, do you look for a way to solve that problem or overcome that obstacle? Or do you throw up your hands and say, it's hard, I'm going to ask somebody for help? So again, that's maybe another intangible that you get through some other corporate job that helps you get into security. What about the folks that have their degree and they don't have the experience? Where would you direct them to start working to build that experience?
You've got your degree. I don't know if there's much we can do for you anymore. No, I joke. I had to get that in there. I think, yeah. So if you've got your degree, maybe it's in cyber or tech, or maybe it's not. It's an unrelated field, and you're thinking, hey, there's opportunities in cybersecurity. The work seems interesting from what I'm reading or hearing about. I think all of the above things we mentioned, right? Get involved in the organizations, get involved in the community, activate LinkedIn, start using it, right? Start connecting with some of the folks who are in the position you want to be in. The advice is still similar. Don't count on your degree to open additional doors for you, because broadly, the security industry does not care about your academic pedigree, right? I certainly don't. And a lot of people that I know who are hiring or who are working in this industry don't really care, are not impressed by your academic credentials, right? If you have your academic credentials and you have something to back it up with, and we can talk shop, we can talk tech, you've done something beyond that, and you're not just saying, hey, I have my degree, where's my job? And there's no entitlement, things are fine, right? So the degree is great. And if it was a personal milestone that you wanted to achieve, or something that your parents are proud of you for, and there's all kinds of reasons to get your degree, but don't think of it as a career advantage in the sense that it might have been at some point.
That's a great point. Great way to phrase it. So we're coming up on time here. I got to ask you the one question I ask everybody at the end. Is there anything in the industry that we're not talking about, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
What are we not talking about? In the industry, we are not talking about. We're not talking about this thing that I mentioned earlier, right? What does it actually mean to be in security, right? We have a very narrow definition of it, and we're not. We've gotten away from security is just technical, right? So that's a good first move. Security is not just technical, right? If you're a GRC analyst, you're working those fields, for example, you're in cybersecurity, right? So that was a good first move. Now the move is, what does it mean to work in security, right? So when someone comes up with the X million jobs in cybersecurity, are they just talking about roles that have the word security in them, or are we talking about some of these other tech adjacent, security adjacent roles? Let's open up the definition of what it means to work in cybersecurity.
Yeah, and so on the candidate side, try to keep an open mind, and that's going to open a lot of extra doors for you.
Correct.
Point. So this has been a great conversation, Gotham. If people want to get a hold of you, find you online, what's the best way to do that?
I live on LinkedIn, Gotham Sharma, and for folks who are looking to start their journeys and explore what opportunities exist out there, I would recommend checking out accesscyber.co.
Awesome. Thanks, Gotham. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Pete.